Hello everybody, let's hope this one works. This is my re-recording of week 5, planning, theory, analysis and debate. The debate's going on during the tutorials and the question and answer sessions, and also whilst you're working on assignment number 2. So I leave you to that. I won't talk about assignment 2 too much this week. I'm still in the middle of marking assignment 1. I'm probably a third of the way through at the moment, and there's some exceptionally good ones, and there are some which are not so good. It would appear a number of students on this unit have not actually read the question or the guidelines in the Moodle site on the most basic aspect of actually submitting it as a professional report. But I'm giving everybody an individual feedback sheet, so we'll see how we go. So let's dive straight in. And last week we saw Old Ebenezer's idea of the garden cities, and this is where we develop on from these. So you have a large city in the centre, and then you've got these small satellite cities or towns, all connected with a public transport system and Romanesque straight roads. So not to linger here. Just to recap here that Canberra has a very strong garden city influence in it. As you can see, you've got the main area in the middle here, and you've got some satellites going on here. This is more modern development that's going on here. So there is an indication of it there, planned out in 1912 with planning principles underpinned by the garden city movement. The whole thing behind the planning, and it really should be part of planning nowadays as well, is to make sure people can actually get to work easily, and they've got places for leisure and recreation, and they can get to their hospitals and libraries, make it easy to get around. Unfortunately, modern planning probably doesn't do that very well. So if we have a look here, we've got different types of planning layouts. So up the top here, we've got the grid pattern, and this goes in order. So that's the old pattern we used to have, and then we went to oblong. We developed into the long oblong grid, and we started to get into loops and cul-de-sacs, and then we ended up, not quite, just loops and crescents I mean to say, and then we end up in cul-de-sacs. And you can see, you know, the cul-de-sacs aren't as new as you think they are from 1932. Now, why did we develop from a nice grid, which is quite simple to navigate, to things like this? As you can point out here, the percentage of area that the streets take up is 36% in a grid, but it's only 23.7% for cul-de-sacs, which means that the percentage of buildable area, number of houses, etc., goes up from 64% to 76%. Which means your developers can squeeze more houses on and make a bigger profit. So it's driven by profit. So we can see the evolving patterns. So the gridiron which we had up here was about 1900, late 18 to 1900s. A lot of Georgian and Regency type properties are like this, or developments. Then they started to fragment them a little bit. They got a bit longer, partly driven by commercial needs and the type of buildings, but they found that a bit easier to build. As we see, the proportion that you can build on goes up. Then we start to bend them. The 1960s were great in bending all these roads, and you have these long... I mean, you just have to look at council estates. A perfect example of this one here, the warped parallel, would be Dagenham in London. It was built slightly before 1960, but it has got these long curving roads. You can't actually see the end of the road from another end in places. And then during the sort of 70s and that, we start getting little lollipops on the loops. So you've got these you've got these bendy roads, and then you stick a little lollipop in and create a cul-de-sac, which means you're actually developing, the plot sizes are getting smaller, but you're developing more houses in here. And then what's quite common nowadays, started in about the 80s, is you get the lollipops on the stickers. We've got up here the cul-de-sacs, which has got the greatest developable area, but it does have a slight problem to it. So if we start looking at these, you've got basically the grid pad and the lollipops here, and you can point. If you live in this house and your school's there and you want your children to go to school, they just walk across the road here, up here, round here, they're at school. Done. Exactly the same distances, and the school and the market are in the same places, and your house is in exactly the same place here. If you want your kids to walk to school now, you're living in the lollipops cul-de-sacs, they have to go all the way around here, up to the main road, and then walk along to the school. As you can see, it's probably 3 or 4 times longer distance. It's more dangerous for the children going along the main road. Therefore, that's why we have so much traffic at school time, because people take their kids to school in cars now. It's difficult to get to your shops, and you're more cut off. So you're actually fragmenting the feeling of community, because you don't get to see your neighbours as much as you did in this one. As a comparison, we've been driven by transport. Cul-de-sacs wouldn't work without transport. You get lots of traffic jams as you try to... If everybody goes to work from a cul-de-sac at the same time, you get a traffic jam. Then when they come out of the cul-de-sac, if I go back and show you, if you're driving to work, here, if you had a car, you could come out here, here, here. You could go here and here. Lollipop, you can only go that way, and then you get to the main road. You have a massive congestion here, and possibly here. So it's not as good. Now, just to prove the point, what does it take to transport 60 people? Assuming each person drives their own car on their own, there's 60 people travelling. Look at the amount of space, not to mention the pollution. If you use a bus, one bus can take 60 people. Isn't that a bit more preferable? And then finally, if everybody rode a push bike, all 60 people, that's all they'd take up, and they don't produce any pollution. But we can argue the case, what happens? There's the cars again, 60 people. Alright, they'll all use autonomous driving Ubers. So there's the Ubers before they're autonomous. 60 people still take 60 cars. Autonomous cars, if they all want to travel at the same time going to work, and they order a car, they're still going to need 60 cars. So the autonomous car does not solve the problem at peak periods. Out of peak periods it probably would, because one car could get around 3 people. But if they want to go to work at the same time, to the same place, then it's no difference. If we go to Melbourne, I mean, have a look how transport's overtaken people. We do have a person here, and we have possibly it's possibly a lady, or it could be a hippie. I don't know. You've got a tram system in Melbourne, so the centre of the road has to allow for 2 trams. So you've got 6.6 metres. Then cars need to pass on one side, that's another 5.3. On the opposite side, you've got cars passing and parked cars, 2 metres for a parked car. Then you've got a metre for the separating strip on either side. Then you put in a bike lane, 2 metres on either side, and all of a sudden your pedestrians are stranded. I mean, how... Apart from a crossing, and there aren't that many crossings on some of these roads, remember legally you can cross a road not on a crossing if you're more than 20 metres away from one, I think. So if you needed to get across the road, how do you negotiate that? I mean, it's not as bad as crossing the road in, say, India, but it's difficult. And these bike lanes are coming in more and more often nowadays. So that's not how you should share your transportation, your roads and your circulation space, really. And then of course you can use the high technology examples on how to do this, and this is a Chinese idea. This is prototype. It's not operational at the moment, but if you've got cars and you've got traffic in the way, why not go over the top of them? It's like a monorail or a raised railway track, but without the infrastructure particularly. It's just got some rails, which are probably cheaper and easier to put in. Obviously you'd have to have raised platforms or some way of getting people in, and I'm not sure how they would get disabled people in, but I'm sure they would sort that all out. And on the face of it, it looks quite a clever idea, but the cars are still there, and it's high, so there could be height restrictions going on. and I'm assuming this is probably electrically powered, but it's not really taking any cars off the road. Just have a look at the hierarchy. So we have the sustainable hierarchy. So the most sustainable is walking. As you say, you look around the population, you can see we don't do a lot of walking. I mean, obviously I don't. I do actually, it just doesn't make any difference to my waistline. Followed by that is cycling. So you can all cycle along. You don't have to wear lycra. I don't think it suits many people. What do they call men? Middle-aged men in lycra are called mammals, I think. Then public transport, buses and trains. For some reason, they seem to have the taxi and the pool car. They think the taxi is more efficient than the pool car. I don't know. The taxi might only have one passenger. The pool car might have four. So they could be a bit closer than they're shown here. Then there's a private car, which is one person. We know that's bad. And then there's my commuting method, which is by air, and it's really bad. If you all remember, I fly up from Brisbane on a Tuesday morning and I fly home again on a Thursday night. So I'm not very good at this. But then if we look at the expenditure, okay, hardly anything spent on bikes and walking. They spend a bit of money. This is the Scottish Government, by the way. They spend a bit of money on buses. They spend a little bit more on ferries and planes. In Scotland, they've got quite a few islands. They spend quite a bit more on railways. But when it comes to the private car, the trunk roads, motorways, they spend the most on them. But hang on, there's some of the work. It doesn't seem to fit, does it? So most of the stuff that goes on the road, if you think of all the lorries and the goods that are transported around, could really go on the railways. And then you could just use smaller trucks to take it from the railway in the city to the shop or whatever, instead of taking it from one city straight into the shop in another city. Bicycling, this is my type of bike in here, the little photo I took of myself. You cycle to the pub, but you're cycling, so you're getting traffic off the road, so there's no reason you can't cycle. There's some people cycling to work. A very brave young lady in a very short skirt on a bike, but she's cycling. She's in the bike lane. This bloke seems to be looking to turn, and the bus or coach is about to get him, I think. So there's no separated, designated bike lane, particularly just a dotted line. And of course, they've got people who just use bikes all the time for their own leisure and for their own commuting, because these people probably only go around this local town. This is Dartmouth in Devon. It's where the Mayflower set off to find America. And you've got to does active commuting, basically making you ride a bike or walk, is it good for you? Is it good for your health, physically and psychologically? Yes, it is, generally. Everybody would agree that going for a walk makes you nice and happy. Depends where you're going for a walk too, but it can make you happy. Going for a bike ride with the kids or something at the weekend, or the pub, as I would, makes you happy. A 10-minute ride to my local pub's really nice. Bit trickier when it's a 25-minute wobble back, but, I haven't taken a car. Trees in cities are very useful. Trees tend to reduce heat gain, they tend to reduce humidity. They actually have a good psychological effect on people. This is a new walk in Leicester. It's a very old pedestrian walk. It's always been a pedestrian walk with mature trees. Trees are a fantastic thing to put in. An example, there's a red bus, so it must be England, I would think. Look at those lines of trees. They're really lovely trees, big blobs of trees up here. That's providing lots of shelter and shade, keeping the sun off you. Yes, Britain does get sun sometimes. This being America, I think this is Charleston somewhere, and they've pruned and allowed the trees to go right over the top of the street. It's a hot, humid location, so these trees will be controlling the environment a bit. They will definitely stop you getting sunburnt. They will reduce the heat underneath, as with a shading effect, and they do reduce the humidity. And they're quite low maintenance, really. And an example of exactly what a tree will do if you put them into towns and cities. They protect your waterways. They get a bit of nitrogen fixed in. They encourage animals and insects. They stop erosion, or limit erosion. You can have timber, but the ones in the cities you don't tend to cut down. They do release oxygen. Forget the firewood, you don't cut them down. They take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They reduce evaporation rates, lowering humidity. Birds and that again. They protect from frost if you're in a cold area. They provide shade if you're in a sunny, hot area. They do make people happier. And they break up wind. So they're an excellent thing to put into a city. And a little thing there, I'm not going to read it, never do that for you. You can read this one yourself, but it's about the benefits of putting trees in urban areas. As someone once said, if we could get rid of cars, whether we're using more public transport or we've got automated cars and maybe they have reduced the number of cars eventually, then you could turn all the car parks into parks. Now, Los Angeles have got this fantastic idea they're doing at the moment. They're called pavement treatment. Remember, most of the roads and pavements that we see are a fairly dark colour. They're either tarmac, asphalt, even concrete ones go dark over time. So LA's come up with the idea of painting the roads with a reflective coating. And it's real simple to use. You just pour it out, spread it, and it dries very quickly. And you end up with this beautiful white road, which does self-clean when it rains, apparently. The advantage of that road is reflects the radiant heat from the sun, so the actual surface of the road is lower. The pavement can be 25 to 30 degrees lower. That's Fahrenheit because it's an American article. That's an awful lot. I mean, if you've ever tried to walk barefoot on some of this, it's ridiculous. So that's a big reduction. It reduces the heat island effect. That's basically where built-up areas tend to be hotter than rural areas outside. The buildings tend to trap the heat in. They've got more hard areas in cities that heat up, and they do radiate the heat at night. So the heat's absorbed by the roads and pavements during the day, and then it's released slowly at night, which keeps the temperatures high overnight. So by putting this reflective coating on, reducing the temperatures by 25-30 degrees, you're having a big impact later on in the day. And they've estimated in Los Angeles it's going to save them around $100 million a year in electricity savings by people not running their air conditioners all the time. It's a fantastic idea. That's really what we were going to look at this week. There's a lot of reading for this week to go into, which bulks this out quite a lot. But you need to understand the effect of how we lay out a town or city to how it affects people. The fact that we've gone from originally a very easily navigated grid pattern, where you could walk quite easily, you'd have corner shops, and so you didn't have to go too far, to nowadays where our shops tend to be put in shopping malls on the outskirts of towns or cities, and we're living in cul-de-sacs with very limited public transport. The cul-de-sacs, as you saw, lengthen your commute. So you've got to fight out your cul-de-sacs, and then you've got to go away to a shopping centre. So modern design is completely and utterly reliant on personal transport cars. And we need to start to move away from this nowadays. I saw a programme last night on the telly about artificial intelligence. And it was arguing that in 20 years we probably won't even be given driving licenses as humans, and all the cars will be completely automatic. Is that going to solve the problem of living in cul-de-sacs? I don't think it is. And I'll just leave you with a nice landscapey photo I took Tasmania. You can definitely tell which way the wind's blowing, can't you? Any questions? Please try and put your questions on the Q&A notice board. It's better than sending me an email. I've started answering people saying, can you put it on the Q&A please instead, because then everybody gets the question and the answer, and it's quicker, and I do tend to look at the Q&A forum a bit more often than my email sometimes. So I hope you've got sound this time, and I hope this is doing quite well for you. Okay, I will carry on through the assignments. I'm aiming to get them done by, well, I'd like to say the end of this week. It's probably early next week. And then I'll put all the results up and work out how you get my feedback forms back. So I will look forward to seeing you. I'm recording this on Tuesday morning, so tonight for a tutorial. Okay.